collaboration is so important. So, help me. Welcome back to Sacramento, the funny, smart, educated, dedicated, hardworking, obsessive, immersed in Russia, so sociable, so fun, but you'll find all that out tonight, Janet Fitch.
It's wonderful to be back in Sacramento. Now it's summer, so you're getting Russia for all seasons here. It's great to be here. It's great to do a benefit for the community of writers at Squaw Valley. I, too, was a participant there back in '95. I met my editor there, who eventually published White Oleander. A lot of the writers in this country came through the community of writers at Squaw Valley. So in supporting them, you're supporting literature in America in no small way. So thank you to the community of writers at Squaw Valley.
You just opened a door on something. What were you working on in 1995? What were you?
Short stories. I was working on short stories, and I got a really good leader in my workshop. And I thought, man, if I ever have a novel, I'm going to send it to him. And I did. And he's the one who published White Oleander.
Do you want to say a name?
Michael Peach. He's now head of the whole book group. Yeah, and I'm hoping that he'll get sick of it and go back to editing.
All these stories start somewhere with somebody trying something and meeting someone and making the connection. So some of you started with this sequel tonight with us a year and a half ago. Who was here when we talked about the revolution of Marina M? Okay.
I got you on
this is good, because this side of the room will gasp or ooh or ah, and this side of the room will be, I don't know what that meant.
We won't do that. We won't do that to you. You're in good hands.
This is a brand new book. Mine doesn't make it look so. However, it just was released July 2nd, so I'm expecting that not many people in this room have read it. Could I see a show of hands of anyone who has? Okay.
A couple of early
Those are your top 3 favorite readers. Right there. So I think it'll be helpful to talk about the fact that we've been in the midst of the Russian Revolution, if we've been following Janet, maybe days, weeks, or a couple years. Janet, however, has been living the Russian Revolution for how long? How immersed have you been in it?
It's been 12 years since I got the crazy notion to write a novel set in the Russian Revolution. To the degree that when I write my checks, I am still writing 1919. I can't seem to get up to speed quite yet. You know, living in a novel, you know the characters more intimately than you know most of the people you actually know. You know where they come from, you know their thoughts, which you only know partially with your fellow human beings.
Let's start with Marina right off the bat. She's the central character. In book 1, she's almost 16 when we meet her. In book 2, she's 19. She's somewhat based on a Soviet-American poet, but give a sense of a little bit of who Marina was then and who she is when we meet her now.
Marina at 16 is a young poet, very ambitious to become, in Russia, to become a poet, a great poet. Is many a literary girl's ambition, girl or boy, is high ambition. She's the daughter of an intelligentsia family, well-heeled, well-educated. She's a daddy's girl. She's a lively, passionate person who is becoming aware of the social injustices under the Tsar, the extreme deprivation of the people during World War I. She's starting to become politicized by her friends. And she sides with the revolution when it breaks and causes a rift in her family. She goes over to the revolution. She becomes involved with the radical poet and part of that poetry circle. She lives the life of the revolution, which she had not really had no idea what that would be like. By the time we open in Chimes of Lost Cathedral, this is 1919, which is the height of the Russian Civil War. The Bolsheviks look like they're going to be crushed. They've been pushed into a small territory for Russia, surrounded by her enemies, and she is pregnant by, there's the radical poet who she eventually marries in the Revolution of Marina M, but there's also somebody from before, her older brother's best friend, who is kind of a charming rascal. And that is her great obsession, that guy. And
that's a good place to connect.
Okay.
Most people understand that there was someone before, right?
Right. The charming rascal.
Oh, that was a really polite reaction. Okay,
Yeah.
now let's get real. For most everybody, there was someone before. Well, we had a very big laugh in the second row.
Right. So this is the father of the child. She was pregnant in 1919. I was trying to check there.
Yeah.
By her first great love, who is in and out of her life. She is trying to find a place to wait out the pregnancy. She tried to wait it out at the end of Marina M, her mother's estate in the country. She thought she would go there, wait out the pregnancy through a long winter, and then be able to make her decisions. But her mother, who was always a fashionable spiritualist, has set up a spiritual commune at the estate with a spiritual master and the whole bit. And Marina has stuck that out as long as she could, and she couldn't take it anymore and leaves. And that's the end of volume 1. So what we open in the current book, no spoilers, is she's waiting out her pregnancy in a railroad town on the line to Petrograd, which is Petersburg. Petersburg, the name changed during World War I because it sounded too German to the Russians. Petersburg, it's Dutch. So they Russified it to Petrograd. And Petrograd is a time and a place. It's Russia from 1914 to 1924, the death of Lenin, and then it became Leningrad. So this is a novel about Petrograd. And she doesn't want to go back to Petrograd because there's scarcity, like terrible scarcity. During the Civil War, there's a blockade. So no goods in the city. So she's waiting out the pregnancy in a railroad town with a one-armed railroad man who loves her and wants her to marry him, and she's going to adopt the child, and she's like, oh, brother, now what am I going to do? She's 19 years old, she still is still a poet. The idea of moldering in this backwater for the rest of her life with this guy, nice as he is, just isn't in the cards.
So we'll fill in a few more gaps, but that was such a lovely setup to who Marina is that I'm just going to say that before we bring Carissa on stage, Marina is now working as a maid in a boarding house, and what she needs to do is go to a bread line every morning and be able to wait in line for bread. So this is where we find her at this first reading of the book, and she is in a long line of women who do the same thing every morning. Mimi, it's wonderful to have you here. Welcome, Mimi Miller, everybody. So glad you're here. So lovely. You came at the right time. The readings are just about to begin. So let's meet Marina. With many thanks and a welcome to Carissa.
I took my notebook from the bag and began to write something about the wasted time of all of us women. A poem to the queue. The little girl with the somber face had inspired me. I was tired of the clumsy drabness of my own thoughts. Fun was rarer than peacocks. It made me laugh, not a sound much heard in a morning bread queue. The old woman in front of me, fragile-shouldered in a heavy scarf, turned my way. "What are you writing, Dievushka?" I shrugged. "Something I was thinking. Something funny, read it." She nudged another woman, a broad-shouldered baba with a faint mustache. "Listen, she's written a joke." "Well, let's hear it," said the bigger woman. The lines on her face were weathered hard like ironed taffeta. I swear I could hear her face crinkle when she spoke. "God have mercy, I could use a laugh." "It's not done yet," I said, tickled that someone would want to hear it, especially this crusty old girl. "Go on," she squinted to read the tiny scrawl. I couldn't resist. "A poem to the queue," I began. "Attention, comrades, padrugi, sisters, mothers, aunts," "You too, Granny." "Snothead," the solid baba murmured good-naturedly. "It has come to the attention of the Regional Soviet, a widespread speculation in the matter of queues." They were listening, the two babas and the little girl's mother. "Look at these hours, days, weeks squandered. You sisters, standing like tired horses, stamping before the station, your steamy breath knee-deep in snow, in mud, the waste of precious Soviet time." Now they smiled, recognizing the official Bolshevik Pravda tone, understanding it was a joke, a poem for them. More people turned to listen, a girl behind the woman with the child. "It must be capitalists, foreign imperialists, wreckers, take warning. From now on, time will be closely rationed by narcompros." Outright chuckles. I held my finger up to my nose and then pointed discreetly at each one of them, a village admonishment. Laughter was like water in this desert. The baba with the mustache murmured, "Why not? They've rationed everything else." The woman with the child unconsciously stroked her long plaits. "This is not your old bourgeois time, served up with lace and opera capes. This is Soviet time you're wasting. Soviet women measuring time in bread and sweat and shoe leather. Therefore, it's been declared only a put and a half of time per family per week." Now they were laughing openly. The woman in the wool scarf clapped her mittened hands to her cheeks. "The hours of your beautiful red blood flow out with the hands of the clock. Nobody's getting any younger. 4 hours in the queues? Such extravagance! And in wartime? It's counter-revolutionary, anti-communistic. Down with the capitalist piecework queue, wrecking our days, digesting us full, consuming our Soviet dreams." Now I had come to the end of the written poem, but was caught up in the joke and the rhyming of the thing. I kept going, making it up like Misha's Chatuski. "Slaves of the queue, I propose we declare this the International Day of Waiting. Sisters, we should demand speeches. Where are our medals, our slogans, our internationale? We demand a newspaper, the Standers Gazette." "Call it my varicose veins," said the woman with the kerchief. "My aching feet," said the little woman with the patched coat. Oh, the beautiful phlegmy music of their laughter.
How is that experience? This is a brand new book, and it's really quite new for you to have an audience experiencing it and someone else reading it.
I love it. I love that I didn't have to choose the readings. And I didn't have to do the readings. You know, what luxury.
All right, there's a lot of poetry in the book. If you were here before, you know we talked about at one point you embarked on book one thinking it might be all written in verse, which is amazing. how much poetry in this book is a Russian translation versus your own poetry? That poem, for example.
That was mine. I can write my characters' poetry, but I can't really write my own poetry. I don't understand how that works, but it's because I know where they are, I know what their circumstances are, I know how they think, I know what they've been reading, what poets have affected them, and I'm able to write their poetry. And because she's a poet, her mind, she's often quoting poetry to herself, right? And in this book, many of the poets that she has read are active characters because she comes to live in a communal situation with the great poets of Petrograd. So there's a lot of Russian poetry in it, actual poetry, that I have a friend who is a translator and one of the editors of the Penguin Book of Russian Poetry, who did original translations for this book, And then if he knew of a better translation of something, he would give me their email that I could go right to the translator and say, can I use a piece of your Pushkin or a piece of your Lermontov or something.
I'm imagining how that might go.
Generous people.
Hi, I'm Janet Fitch. I wrote White Oleander and Painted Black, modern dark American stories, and now I'm deep in the Russian Revolution.
No, I more say, I'm working on a book about a poet set during the Russian Revolution, and this man, Boris Drulyuk, suggested I contact you about the possibility of using a little bit of your translation of one.
And then they say,
and they tend to, they're so generous. The translators are amazing because they spend all their time listening very closely to other people and trying to bring other people's voices through. And I was very, very lucky to fall into this nest of generosity.
So the genre that these books are set in is historical fiction. There is a lot of history that you must have chosen to stay true to because so much is known about those revolutions, and in fact you have deep education in that arena.
Yeah, I was an undergrad history major, so and Russia was my field. But what that training best accomplished, I guess, is I'm a stickler for getting it right. And that runs through all my fiction. I want that somebody who has lived through the experience could read my book and go, that's right, she got it right. Rather than that's BS, and she has her head up, Yeah. So with this, I knew there were times that my editor wanted to merge events or change when things happened. It would be so much easier if you could, and it's like, no, because you might not know the difference, but if an historian read it, they would think, oh, this chick didn't do her research. I got a review in the New York Times by an historian who wasn't much interested in the lives of women, but he objected to the amount of sex in the book.
So if you haven't read it yet, that's just a spoiler.
I wanted to write to him and say, how old is your daughter?
But it's not happening to his daughter.
But he never said I got anything wrong on the history.
So let me ask you about the flip side. Being that way, where do you give yourself latitude? A fictional character, obviously, but where's your freedom to run with the story and make things up?
Well, because we live in history, and that's, again, we all live in history. We can't make it up that Hillary's the president. It just, we live in the world as it is, and the book takes place 1916, the first book started in 1916, and the story moves through the revolution until it ends in 1921. So my character's the same age as essentially, so she's 21 in 1921. So it takes her from 16 to 21. And the freedom that one has, even in writing history, like writing straight history, is you decide where the story is by picking what events you want to cover, what events touched her, what events changed her, touched her own personal life, or the life of the city that she was living in. So it's the selection is where the freedom to decide how to shape an historical narrative comes from. But then there's her own story, which she's a passionate person and confident person. I've never had such a confident protagonist. Yeah. So confident people make different mistakes than cautious ones, than indecisive ones, than self-doubting ones, very internal. She really makes mistakes. And so it's so she is like having an internal revolution while the world is having its revolution. So it's a revolution within a revolution.
It's a good point to say, if you've not read book 1, you can read book 2 and go back to book 1. And you anticipated that.
Yes, I did. I told my editor that what I want, because I'm kind of a rebel. I often start, like if there's a trilogy, I often go to the bookstore and book 1 is missing. And I don't want to wait, I want to read it. So I'll start with book 2, often, or book 3 even.
Who does that, by the way? Who reads stories out of order?
So for rebels like myself, or also for people who's read the first book a while back and don't necessarily want to reread it, I've put a cast of characters and notes on the events of the first book in the beginning. So telling you who everybody is and where we left them, so that you can just jump in.
I love that. The refresher, but if you read book 2 and put the pieces back together and went back to book 1, it's like you went to the prequel.
And what's also cool that they let me do is that they made maps I'm a map person. I need to know where things are. And they hired the guy who did the maps for George R.R. Martin for Game of Thrones. And so I have a Civil War map for me of where my characters were and where the battle lines were, just so you can understand, and a map of Petrograd in 1919 and where everybody, because I need to know where. It's not for me, that's super important. I think my mind just works geographically. So
I think we're going to get to this later on, but I think your mind works a lot with senses, and as well as the senses, the place, where you were, what that detail is. And because you teach, I have heard you say that you teach people that you can't dry lab emotion or experience. You can't fake it. You can't replace the really having been there or felt it or seeing it on a map.
Writers work in a room by themselves, often with not much of a view, with a stupid little machine in front of you. It's hard to remember what August felt like in January. It's hard to remember what the trees smelled like in bloom. So I have my students go out and take notes, write it up, put it in notebooks, so that when it's time to write about July in January, they can see this, they can see what it smelled like, they can remember the way the light hit things at 3 in the afternoon, and the dried out washcloth, the dried out towel on the clothesline that you forgot to bring in, that crunchiness, you miss that. You can't, it's very hard to recreate the world. So sense detail, when I teach, I make my students like go out and smell the dirt. Go out and smell, and you can tell who has actually done it and who hasn't. It's a muscle. You have to do those reps. You can't phone it in. So dry labbing is something when I was in college, it was a term that the scientists used, the people in the lab sciences. The dry labbing is where you don't actually do the experiment and get wet. You just write it up as if you had done the experiment. So dry labbing, there's no substitute for direct experience.
I wonder if we said to our kids or somebody younger, don't dry lab it, if they would sound really cool and prompt a conversation, and then they would say, what does that mean? Oh, well, if you were a scientist. And then the conversation begins. So let's get to some of that detail. And I am going to say a name here, and I want you to say it the way you feel it, envision it, what this persona is. So the name is Marina's husband, Genya.
Okay.
Who is Genya? How is Genya? How do you feel? What's your sense?
Genya is, he's the radical poet, and he's a worker by his class origin. His worker is proletarian. And her father hated him when she came up with him. I see him, as he's a big guy. He calls himself a bargeman Keats. So he's a Keats inside, but he looks like he's towing a barge. So he's he's a contradictory character. I love a good paradox. That internal contradiction makes for a really interesting character. So he's a big guy. He's very tender, but he's also very concerned with how he looks to others. He's got to live up to his ideal of being a proletarian radical. So he struggles with his tenderness. He struggles. He's broody. I often think of characters, I cast them like actors. And I see him, his texture, he's sort of Brando-like, It's like vulnerability, but he can't stand that vulnerability, So he gets angry when people see it. When it comes out, he'll do things that are excessive because he can't stand his own vulnerability.
We have had a number of conversations about this book. I have yet to see Janet talk about Genya and not do this.
I can feel him, yes.
And I thought, is she going to do it this time in front of the audience? And you do. You have a Genya move.
Yeah,
so.
I see them so clearly.
Okay, so let me set the stage a little bit. Oh, you'll have to fill in something here.
Okay.
Marina has reunited with Genya, and they are on something called an agit train called the Red October, which is going through small towns. And this is a vehicle to deliver agit prop, which was really important during the Russian Revolution. So if you want to say a little bit about the reality of these trains.
About the agit trains. The agit trains were like little cities on wheels. They had a printing press. Journalists traveled on them and filed stories about the war. They had stops sometimes in the middle of nowhere because their job was to keep the peasantry feeding the army and not turning on them. Because if you're moving your army's moving this way, peasants are feeding the army behind. If they turn on you, you're fighting both ways, So the idea of the agit train is to keep the people behind the army, behind the Bolsheviks, reminding them why they're fighting, reminding them that this is their country. They don't want the land to go back to the landowner, which is what would happen if they lost. So she's in this railroad town with the one-armed railroad man, thinking, and she's really pregnant, and she really does not know what she's going to do with herself when everybody starts running to the train station. What's going on? What's going on? She waddles down to the railroad station and sees this agit train, which is painted brilliant Russian constructivist art on the sides of the trains, and the workers and the smokestacks and stuff. And they're doing a play which is called an agit play, where it acts out four simple people. what they're fighting for, what it's all about. And this giant guy comes forward to read, he doesn't have to read, he recites his poetry, and it's her husband, it's Genya. And she is out of there like that.
Yeah, the one-armed guy is gone, and now she's on the train.
She's broken his heart, yeah.
And she is rolling on the train, and she is more and more pregnant, and then labor is starting to begin.
Oh, yeah.
And they come into a little town, and it's apparent that she's going to need some help, so they call for the midwife. The midwife comes to the train, and there's some discussion that Marina should stay in the little town and be with the midwife, but the train needs to what?
It's in the middle of the war, and they've opened.
Needs to roll on.
The front is opened. The Reds are pushing the Whites back, and the train needs to. The way is open, so Genya's got to make a decision here.
Carissa's going to present a portion of the story when the midwife is speaking to Marina, but this battle is going on between Marina and Genya about where she's going to have the baby, and there isn't a lot of time. Carissa?
Has the water come? I nodded. How long ago? It was hard to say if it was 5 hours or 15. Maybe noon? And the Sujenya, contractions, how far apart? She was very abrupt, but I could see her knowledge struggling with her loathing of us. Her deep-seated purpose to bring life into the world getting the upper hand. 20 minutes, 30, it's my back. I started to cry. She was nodding coolly. She'd seen all of this before. I loved her already. And when was your last confession? Suddenly, Genya was there, grabbing the old lady's blouse like he was going to punch her, yelling in her face with his mighty lungs, "What difference does that make, you old fool? Who cares? No, we're not doing this. It's insane, Marina." "A long time," I told her. "We should get started," the old lady said. "No, I forbid it. Marina, you can't let her." The midwife raised her voice. It was clear and hard. "Your wife is ill. She's fevered. She's already in danger. She's been sick for a week. You call me insane? You people aren't human, you're animals." Grigory from Krasnaya Gazeta ran out of the train. "Kuryakin, it's good news. The Third Army has just taken Perm. The track's open." I heard Marfa Yermilova's voice sharp. "It's what we've been waiting for." Other voices clamoring all at once like seagulls. "Can you just give me a minute?" Genya roared, and knit his fingers atop his head as if things were falling on it. "Just a minute." He turned back to the old lady. "Anything happens to her, I swear I'll kill you." "If God wills it, so it shall be." He howled as if it were he, not I, who was experiencing the deep pain of labor. He grabbed his head like it was on fire. "That's it," he shouted, scrambling up into the wagon. "You go to your good Christian hell, all right? And take your piousness with you." He was lifting me up. "I'm not leaving my wife with you. Stop it, Genya." I fought him like an animal, wrenching myself from his grip. "I need her. I can't do this alone. Put me down." I didn't know where I got the energy, but I arched and twisted like a cat. He had to put me down or drop me. He clutched his head like it was filling with demons. "What are you talking about? You're not alone. Look, you have me. You have all of us." And he waved his hand toward the comrades of our train. Matvai and Antushan, Dutkov the printer, Grigory, Slava, Apollonia, Aksakov, Marfa Yermilova, Kostya from Pravda, an entire audience smoking, watching our drama. All his spacemen, his propagandists and theoretician actors. I'd give all of them for one old Baba who could safely deliver my child. I didn't care how many icons I'd have to kiss. Maybe I'd want to kiss them. I had stopped knowing who I was or what I wanted. I just wanted to get out of the sight of all these people staring at me and suffer my pain in peace and get this baby out. "Your wife is very ill," the midwife said to my panicked Genya, speaking slowly and clearly as if he were deaf, as if he would have to read the words on her lips. "She could die. I don't think she will, but it's in the hands of God. I can do more for her than you can, of that I'm sure. I could die. I don't think I really believed it until she said it right out loud. I was sick, but I didn't realize how sick, and now the baby was coming. My terror rose into my throat like vomit. It coiled up my spine. I'll kill you myself if you let her die, he said, pointing at her, right at her upturned nose, as if he would stab her with the spear of his finger. I swear to you, I'll come back and burn your whole village. I went into a spasm of labor and laid my head in her lap, clutching her apron. Let's go. The old lady held me hard, pressing my back with her fist, right where it was breaking, splitting in two. I groaned loud enough for everyone on that train to hear. Pray, said the midwife. Pray to Theotokos. Save me, Holy Mother of God. After all my life with Adokia, I knew that prayer like a song. I whispered it along with her. Oh, my all-gracious Queen Theotokos, my hope who befriends orphans and intercedes for strangers, joy of those who sorrow, protectress of those offended. And the words rushed over me like a stream. They soothed me. If I could have Avdokia here with me now, I had this solid peasant woman, and the prayer gave me some human sounds to utter. Look upon my troubles and see my sorrow. Help me, for I am weak. Guide me, for I am wandering. For you know my offense. Resolve it as you will, for I have no other help than you, no other intercessor, no good comforter, only you. O Mother of God, may you keep and protect me into the ages of ages. Amen.
I know you love this piece of the book because it's a reading that you choose. Carissa, I want to give you applause for mastering and navigating all those Russian names. But the arc of the birth of this baby alone is worth reading this book. It is an unbelievable writing and description. There's a lot of mystery, as you can hear, around the midwife. Did you write that in, or was a midwife considered a mysterious character to not only the Russian world, but just
Well, birth is a mystery.
Well, that's true.
Birth is a mystery. Birth is surrounded by superstition in the peasant culture, and we're going to see all of it. Mm-hmm. Because this is not a town. This is not even, this is nowhere. They take her off the train in a small town, but she goes deep into the country, back with the midwife, and she gives birth in a I hope this is not a spoiler. She gives birth in a bathhouse, which is where traditionally women would give birth because there was no privacy in the houses. They were just like one room, two rooms. And there's the bathhouse devil, Bonnet is very much a part of Russian superstition, who hates children. So you have to be very quiet, it's dark, you gotta keep the door closed, make the there's so much superstition around childbirth. Very interesting, because she goes from the train, which is the most progressive, moving into the next century, bringing the revolution to the people, into the deepest, darkest, ancient times within a chapter. And she's in the heart of Russia.
It is absolutely a spectacular section of the book. And I don't want to give any spoilers. I'll just really encourage you to, even if you don't tackle all of it, go there. Except there's another place I want you to go to too, so I'm going to set that up. But suddenly, with the baby's birth, Marina is different, as every young woman who becomes a mother for the first time is, and suddenly she has something outside of herself to live for. And the phrase that you used before is the phrase that gets recalled again, and that is, the girl is the mother of the woman to be. The girl is the mother of the woman to be. So who is Marina now to you as a mother?
Well, Marina has been, she grew up, incredibly spoiled. I mean, she had the nanny, who had been her mother's nanny, who did everything for her. There was the maid, the cook, the, governess, the whole deal. And she got a taste of the life of the revolution, living with the poets and all. But now she's completely alone. There's no one she knows, no one knows her. She has a child now, and she's got to make really big decisions for herself. So beginning with the child, with the coming of the child, she has to be a person who can rely on herself. She has to think ahead. She can't be the wild girl who makes decisions without thinking about what's going to come. She's got to think several moves ahead. And one of the interesting things is that her father taught her to play chess as a young person. As a little girl, her brothers weren't interested, so it was one thing that her father and she were very close. And she becomes somewhat of a chess player. Thinking ahead, how am I going to handle this? She has to be more strategic, and she still makes some choices that are difficult. But she makes, she's gaining in wisdom with that responsibility.
It can be true that when you get to that point in life, life suddenly feels or is more dangerous. You have to rely on yourself. You're a grown-up in the world, and much more comes at you. And that's very true. You bring up her father. That's a key relationship in her life. We talked about Genya. Her lover and the father of her baby is someone named Kalia. We'll get to him in a moment. There are many poets, real and fictional, that are in her life, many of them men. And then there is this other man. The one that you became obsessed with.
Yeah, there's always it's like when you read Elmore Leonard. I don't know if anybody likes Elmore Leonard, but there's the bad guys, and then there's the really bad guys.
So that's where we're gonna go.
So we have a really bad guy in here.
I think we'll let Carissa do the reading.
Oh boy.
And introduce everybody to, I don't think we'll even say a name here.
Okay.
And then you can fill in a lot on the backside. Are you ready?
Yeah. Oh my God.
He stepped into the trembling light, their lord, taller than ever, his spiderweb hair flowing over his shoulders, the long Scandinavian face glowing white in the gloom. The Baron Arkady von Princip, my captor, my lover, my nightmare. It was I who had called him out of the darkness. It seemed the everyday world was the dream, a rickety theater set, while beneath it ran a black river, this monstrous world of myth which was the true world. He fitted himself out in a black monk's cassock, secured by a wide belt, a heavy gold cross dangling over it. On the forefinger of his hand, a huge ring, Gospodar, His Holiness, the Archangel. Hello, Makarova. It's been a long time. You'd hidden yourself away like a little rabbit in a black velvet bag. And suddenly, out you pop. Walking around, brushing your hair, tucking in the kitties. Why, if not to be found? I met his eyes, all pupil. No longer that piercing, clever gaze, no, a jittering, wild stare. He reached out and ran his fingers through my disheveled hair. I shuddered at his touch. Sweat pooled in my armpits, the back of my knees. He liked a room hot enough for orchids. The stab wound in my leg throbbed, the dead boy's final act. But now you're home. Alone with the Minotaur, surrounded by bones, I stifled the cry that was exploding upward. It tore in my throat like a sharp-toothed rat. He poured wine from a ceramic carafe, the liquid almost black as it splashed into the glass. that mocking smile as he held it out to me. Blood of Christ? The relief to smell grape and not the earthy copper of blood as I lifted it to my lips. He'd probably broken into the monastery's wine cellar. I drained it fast, hoping he wouldn't see my hand shake. Too fast. A thin stream escaped and trickled down my chin. He took the vessel from me and wiped my face with his finger. He lifted his own glass and drank. Now he opened a leather-covered book with a scabrous hand. Hands that had always been so well kept, but were now as mottled as his face, and his nails were long and dirty. He smoothed the parchment pages. So many centuries of human thought devoted to devils, revelations, wonders. Look at this. It was a book of martyrdoms. St. Catherine on her wheel, then St. Bartholomew, flayed alive. My nightmare. He stopped at the martyrdom of St. Agatha, her breasts displayed before her on a tray like pears and wine. My shivering increased. Would this be my fate? Parted from the breasts which I'd fed my child? I found myself missing the old Arkady, a man merely running a gang of criminals, not Gospodar in a cassock and cross. You have to appreciate the imagination, he said, cocking his head to one side, considering the ways in which a human body could be harrowed. I'm surprised the Cheka didn't take these when they came for the rugs and the priests. He poured himself another glass. What I would have given for just a drink of water. Stop it. I had to listen now. I had to think. Find a way out of this room. I could twist that chain around his neck until his eyes popped out of his head. Knock the candles onto the table, ignite the papers, grab the gun. He cleared out the spot among the books, the pistol seemingly forgotten. But I knew him. He had not forgotten it. I, who had once tried to cut his throat, and the scar on my palm was a daily reminder of my failure. But inside the breast of his cassock, he produced a squat metal tin, opened the lid. Inside, a powder, very white, like icing sugar. Know what this is, Makarova? Cocaine? Metafet, I said. Stolen from operating rooms at the front. From both sides, red, white, it's all the same. He scooped up a pile with a long pinky fingernail, set it on the back of his hand, divided the pile into two, then snuffed them up in his long aristocratic nostrils, one then the other. He tapped out more, held out his hand to me. I thought of our child addicts. Whole Dietska Doma set aside for them. Orphans would do without food, without shelter, just to have this. But I would not give myself over to him until I had to. He would have to win me inch by inch. I would not make it easy. I turned my head away. He paused. I knew what he was thinking. Never say no to me. But then he shrugged. A small victory.
So let's talk about Von Princip. Who actually is he? What's the comparison in real life? What's the gang he's running?
Well, after the revolution, the Bolsheviks, many people, blamed the police were the agents for the Tsar's secret police. They reported to, they kept vast records on everyone. The superintendent of your building had reported to the police on you and everyone who lived in the building. So after the revolution, they burned all those files and they got rid of the police. In a city of 3 million, there was no police. There were political police. If you said stuff about the revolution or you tried to organize resistance, they would deal with you. If you did speculation in foodstuffs when there was rationing, they would come down on you. But regular crime, there was no police. And everybody knows that crime responds very quickly to a vacuum. And these criminal gangs formed in Petrograd at the time. And there were daylight robberies, house robberies. It was very dangerous. There were a lot of guns in circulation because they'd broken through the armory when the revolution began. And this guy, Arkady von Prinzip, is the head of one of the criminal gangs, and very powerful, and had his gang. Marina fell in with him in a very unfortunate choice for her, and he became obsessed with her. She managed to get rid of him, but avoid him. She left town to avoid him. In the second book, she comes back and she is working in an orphanage. In any Civil War, its biggest product is orphans, and she is working in an orphanage. And when he finds her there, all his men had abandoned him, and he's running a gang of orphans, and has this whole thing where he's the archangel, and he's absolutely become a nightmare figure in the city of Petrograd. So his gang is now children who are addicted to cocaine. There's a lot of cocaine during the Civil War. People don't usually talk about that. The children make ideal soldiers because there are a lot of them. He thinks of them as expendable. People don't notice them. They try not to notice them. So by this time, all of his operatives are children.
Children are a fractionalized group of members of society. In this revolution, you deal with them as newborn orphans, you deal with them as abandoned young children, homeless children, gang runners, naive, lost children. Many children die during the revolution, and I think it's really important that you've shown us so many different layers of this history in a way that people might not take it in otherwise. Maybe someone wouldn't pick up a true nonfiction history book on the Russian Revolution, but you pick up something like this and you glean and learn so much, and you didn't spare us. And as spectacular as that birth scene is, this scene that plays out between Marina and von Prinzip, and she had been kidnapped by children, which is how she got there in the first place. But the brutality, the fear that Janet is able to write, and the role that children have in it, makes me wonder if I really know you, Janet.
Oh, it's very funny, you know.
No, it's not funny at all.
Let's just say, readers know a writer more intimately often than people in their regular life. You know, I may, be socialized and able to, have fun, and I do like to have fun, but you spend time thinking about your deepest concerns and the things that trouble you about life, and I go where my imagination takes me. So readers know me differently, because people are always often surprised when they meet me after having read my books. And it's like, oh, you seem so normal.
So I'm teasing, of course. Please know that I'm sort of teasing, but I do want to tell you that when you imagine a character like the Archangel, and you imagine something horrific, you want to be satisfied by the story that was written about him and what plays out and what happens, so that, can I do one small spoiler? Is that okay? No? All right, I'll just do something. All right. So, people have pets, right? So his pet.
He's captured somebody, as he captured Marina, but Marina escaped, and this girl has been with him for some time.
So much so,
So
that
it
she
is-
believes that she is a dog
So
or
if you-
some animal that would be on the chain, in the collar, and it's a very painful part of the
Well,
story.
Marina is aware that this would have been her. You know, and so there's layers of thought about that.
So the reality of characters happens, we've heard it now in Genya, we're hearing it in Marina, we get it in von Princeps throughout the book, you get it in the poets, the Russian poets, and the purpose of the poetry. Now I want to bring you around to her lover, Kalia. And maybe a little setup about Kalia, and then we'll frame the scene that we're going to hear. But in contrast to these other two, this character of Kalia is going to give you a little bit of fresh air here.
Kalia is one of those charming rascals. He is claimed to only believe, like believes in the revolution. She believes in the people. She believes in the future. And he says, I believe in nothing but myself. I'm a citizen of a country of one, Sharovia. His last name is Shurov, so Sharovia. But he's also a very generous person. He's a practical person. Because he doesn't believe in things, his relationships with people are very, they tend to be practical, helpful. He thinks nothing of trading on the black market, of helping these, some kind of crotchety aristocrats who are holed up in an apartment. He helps them out. He's just, he's a very useful fellow.
So she meets him again after she has been through struggle and situation again and again, interwoven with all the complexities and the suffering of the revolution. She happens to be walking in a cemetery and happens to pause in the cemetery. And I think I'll let Carissa take the story from there.
Finally alone, I strolled along the cemetery's narrow, shady paths. I liked how unkempt it was, the untidy rows and heavy trees. Perhaps this was how it was going to be, beauty relegated to the hidden places, to tall weeds and mossy corners. I collected blooming weeds, asters and carrot and Queen Anne's lace. I remembered walking with Mother in the yard at Marino, the Queen Anne's lace waist high. Then I noticed strawberries growing on the graves and along the paths, no bigger than my thumbnail. The longer I looked, the more I saw them. I collected the little heart-shaped berries in my pocket, careful not to bruise them. I wished certain of my charges were with me. I'd already taken a special interest in a few, though it wasn't right to favor one over another. But that's how it was in life. You like certain people, and didn't we all need to feel singled out by someone as special? Wasn't that a secret gift I could still give? I'd had the idea I would save the berries for them, but in the end I ate them all myself, sitting against a tree watching clouds sail overhead. I could collect more before I left. A man came strolling up the path, well-dressed, wearing a light-colored suit and hat. A foreigner? An Englishman? French? And then the hat tipped back, and the grin. My mouth still full of strawberries. He squatted down in his beautiful suit, not wanting to get grass stains on his trousers. I held out my hand full of berries. He lowered his mouth to my hand and ate them from my palm. The blood of the berries stained his lips as he chewed. It was my heart he was eating, that graveyard fruit. His mouth in my hand, his eyes closed. He had come for me, my Orpheus, to pluck me from the dead. Was he even alive? In his light summer suit and straw hat, shoes of two colors, his laughing eyes upturned. Oh, just like hers. He took his hat off, his chestnut hair curly, longer than before. Slowly, he pulled the scarf from my head, revealing my uncombed locks, which had spent the night in the bushes on the bank of Priashka. His smell, I'd have known it in the last darkness before the grave. Honey and lime. And then we were falling into the grass, the years dissolved like dandelion floss. Later, I lay on the bed, its linen on the floor, covered with sweat and his unique odor. He brought in a tray with vodka, roasted chicken, fresh summer pickles, black bread, and butter. Together we made the bed and sat in it. I couldn't stop eating, licking my fingers. It was a sin when there was famine in Russia, when children were eating dry grass. Yet I stuffed myself shamelessly. He'd made coffee, real coffee, with evaporated milk, fed me pastries, hand pies with apples. My starving orphans just blocks away. And yet I couldn't help it. So easy to be virtuous when you had nothing. In the face of riches, I was as squalid as anyone. If I ended in some Cheka cell when all of this came to pieces, who would thank me for not enjoying the pies? It was fully night when he revealed the flat's final secret. In the back hall, past a tiny kitchen, a door revealed a miracle. A private bath. Toilet, sink, little clod tub. He turned on the taps and water ran. But that wasn't the end. In a few moments, hot water splashed into the slipper-shaped tub. Your bath, madame? He extended his hand and helped me in. I had to suck my teeth as I lowered myself into the steaming tub. The water was that hot, and my body had been thoroughly tenderized. But then, such bliss. Kolya knelt next to me, soaped a washcloth, pear soap. It brought back my childhood, the English herbs, slightly resinous, Avdokia kneeling by the tub, washing me. I should have gone back for her. Everything could have been different, which wasn't to say it would have been any better. I had to remember that. There are infinite ways things could go wrong. But right now, Kolya Shurov was washing my back, the old scars, shampooing my hair. It was mesmerizing to be so intimately tended. His strong, short fingers rubbing my head, then pouring water through my hair. It's grown out, he said, squeezing it with the side of his hand. I was a boy the last time he saw me, leaving him at the Tikvin station, as he'd wept and begged me to come back. I didn't want to think about that now. Life was giving us another chance. I wouldn't question what he was doing here or how long he would stay. I could feel he was dying to tell me. He was fat with secrets. I had secrets too, but unlike him, there would be no fun in revealing them.
Is she blushing?
Yeah, she's earned that. She's earned that, you know. In my books, people don't get stuff for free. They have to earn it.
Isn't that also a place in the society then and the revolution, which is somewhere between the struggle on the streets and the fight for the war? And there's this band of people who can find what they need and gather pear soap and find hot running water and navigate, sort of opportunist in the face of all the revolution. I mean, I see him as not only this little savior, hero, lover, everything else, but also a place in the story that it would be so easy not to see. It would be so easy to miss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But, you know, whenever there's rationing, there's a black market. There's always crime, you know. And the thing is that in those days, during the revolution, business was crime. he who deals on the black market, what is it? He who deals on the black market deals in the soul of the nation, or deals away the soul of the nation. It's but the only way people could live was by buying on the black market. So it was very tough. And he's somebody who's completely amoral. He just does not care what the law says. He wants to do it. He's one of those people who sees the soft place, who sees the crack in the wall. And he's dangerous to people around him. But he also can come up with hot water in 1921. He can come up with butter. I mean, nobody's seen butter in years. So he's somebody who can get stuff done. It's kind of interesting that way.
If you heard the conversation on Insight, you heard me say that as I was reading the book, I appreciated hot water. And I thought about bread, and I thought about food, and we have this lush garden right now, and it made me think about how those small things are so vital, and we have so much of so much. But a walk in the revolution changes your perspective for a while. Can I go to the place about secrets and ask you to draw a parallel between secrets and the government then and the statements you make about communism and where we are today in our government and our conversations and our concerns about the integrity of our elections and all that's going on 100 years apart?
Well, there's a couple of different things. In Russia, I was there as a student during the Soviet era in 1977, and there was a thing the Russians would say. There were two papers, Pravda, which means truth, and Izvestia means news. And there was a joke, there's no truth in Pravda, and there's no news in Izvestia. Russians became very good at reading between the lines, and they're still very good at what's really going on. Marina and everybody, the people without any resource to the actual rooms where decisions are being made, which is very few people, were constantly trying to figure out what the heck was going on. The Bolsheviks closed all the newspapers except the Bolshevik ones. So where are you going to get your news? She has a couple of sources, sometimes, at certain phases, but very much trying to figure out what's going on. And the propaganda machine really started up at that time, where the news was not fake news, but yeah, I guess, in certain critical parts, what they were telling the people could be exactly the opposite of what was really going on. They would figure out what people wanted and found a way to align what they were saying with what people wanted. Where originally the idea was that you seized power in the name of the workers. You, after the war was over, that there was going to be Soviet democracy, which means people actually having a vote and a say, and bring back all but the really reactionary newspapers. But funny, and this is a theme that runs throughout, is it's funny how once people get power, things change. People who start revolutions aren't necessarily the people who finish them. Who ends up with the power is very different than the hopes of the people who make the revolution, as we've seen with Arab Spring. It never was intended to go into the hands of reactionaries. But this is who, the people who have the program often end up with the power. And so the Bolsheviks used their propaganda very effectively to stay in power when it started looking like the people were turning against them. They made sure that didn't happen.
It's wonderful to have an hour, to have such an extended conversation with a writer about all the layers of a book. Are you enjoying this? Can we say? Where the conversation is, Carissa, do you have one more in you? Do you have one more for us? So there are a number of characters, again, true and fictional, that are introduced that help Janet make statements and tell us about the revolution, but also the views. And there's a very interesting character. Janet, do you want to say something about Aura before we begin?
Oh, see, I don't know the readings that they've taken. This is as much a surprise to me as it is to you. Aura Katie Sands is an American opera singer, a Negro opera singer in Russia, singing with Shalyapin, singing the great opera in the middle of tremendous deprivation, but the level of art was incredible in poetry, in music, in all the arts. So she is somebody. She's in Russia because it's the hope for the future, and she is facing as a singer in America, she cannot sing on the same stage as white people. She cannot, she can't go on stage in a third-rate opera in a fourth-rate town. She can't stay at a decent hotel. She can afford a decent hotel, but she can't stay in one. Certainly not in 1919 America. And she has moved to Russia.
And she
embraces the revolution.
And befriends Marina and continually invites Marina to come see her or come stay where she is.
Right. Marina speaks 3 languages, as did many of the educated Russians. They spoke French, they spoke English, they spoke German, as well as Russian. So Marina's father is a Anglophile. That's why the pair are so. So here's somebody who can speak English, and Aura Katie Sands is just very grateful to have someone she can speak to.
So Marina is going at this point to meet Aura, and I think we'll use this as the last reading of the evening to help frame some of the thinking from Aura's view about the United States, about America, where she came from, who she is as an African-American woman in Russia, and where do or don't the countries and the ideals meet.
I ran up to the 2nd floor, rang the doorbell of the flat opposite the staircase, heard the buzz resonate deep inside. Aura herself answered the door. Today she was glorious in a sky blue suit, her hair pinned in a simple chignon. She could have been wearing a robe and a diadem, so queenly did she appear. It was like Nefertiti landing on our cold Neva shores. "Marina, you made it at last." She kissed me on both cheeks, a la Francais, her perfume tinting the air. "They're all in the dining room." Aura seated me between herself and Harris at the far corner of the table, a little enclave of English speakers among the Russians. The British comrade's ears stuck out. His mustache was small and bristly. "So when will the revolution come to England, comrade?" I said, half teasing. He sighed. "Lenin asked me that when I was in Moscow. All I can say is that it's heating up, but more like a Petrograd tram than the Zurich Express." "Lenin asked me too," said Aura, sitting into the seat next to mine, her arm across my chair. "When will we see red flags fly over Wall Street, Comrade Sands?" I told him, "Vladimir Ilyich, if there's a revolution in America, I'll be the first one going back. But it's the only way you'll get me on that boat." "Do you hate America so much?" I asked, thinking of our wonderful trip to New York, my father giving a talk at Columbia University. My 9-year-old impression was of terrifying skyscrapers, crowds, the Brooklyn Bridge. I remember dining with my mother's brother, Vadim, and his glamorous lady friend, and especially her hat, more vertical than horizontal, pinned to the side of her dark hair, white straw faced in black taffeta, the most elegant thing I ever saw. When your country's against you, it's not hate, or as lips curled inward. It's more of a love that's been trampled, like being rejected by your own mother, like being turned out onto the street by your family. She couldn't know how familiar I was with that feeling. Yes, it wasn't hate, it was pain. I'm a Negro, she said. This doesn't wash off. She licked a finger and rubbed the back of her hand to stress the point. I can sing at La Scala, dine at Maxine's, I can have $1 million in the bank, but I still can't stay in a decent hotel in New York. Not only can I not sing at the Metropolitan Opera, I can't appear on stage with a fourth-rate white tenor in a 10th-rate hall in a two-horse town anywhere in the US of A. Tell me, how could a sane person live in a country like that? Yes, it must be enough to drive a person mad. But you could live in France, I said. Drink aperitifs on the terrace at La Rotonde, as I would love to be doing. Why get involved in our problems? Because I believe in the revolution, she said, her golden brown eyes flashing. This is for all of us, not just you. So my father doesn't have to step off the curb when a white man walks past. So the people who do the work are the ones who profit. Who wouldn't want to be part of it? You'd have to be dead not to want to be here. For the first time in quite a while, I remembered the revolution as more than deprivation, suspicion, and terror. She made me remember the other side of it, what we'd already accomplished in only 3 years. And we were almost done with the Civil War. The whites had clearly lost. Maybe the West would soon recognize the fact of us and drop the blockade. A few years of peace to mend and feed ourselves, repair our factories and railroads, and we'd see what communism really could do.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Carissa Meagher. Of course, every reader takes his or her own message and picture from a book, but what would you like people to feel and know and experience out of the whole arc of the story of Marina, but even if it was just this coming of age, wrapping up of the revolution piece?
Well, on the personal level, this is a story about somebody who has come to accept her own nature on a very deep level, come to trust herself, come to know what might seem crazy to someone else makes sense to her, for her, because Russians, I've come to a more Russian view of human nature, which is that there's a nobility and acceptance of who you are, knowing your own nature, knowing what works for you, what's right for you, and what's not, even if it causes decisions that other people wouldn't make. I think there's a deep resonance when you know your own nature. You know what's going to be right for you. That's the title, Chimes of Lost Cathedral. There's a legend of the city of Kitej, where it was a beautiful city built without walls on the banks of Lake Svetloyar. And when the Mongols attacked in the Russian Middle Ages, which lasted like 700 years, the city was so good that it sank beneath the waters of the lake, intact, safe from the attack. And if you are faithful upon the midnight, you can hear the sound of its chimes. And that's a metaphor for the sound of the inner self. So I think that would be the thing I'd want people to take from the book.
That was really beautiful. It was really beautiful. So I'm going to close with a little bit of Marina being asked by her lover, Kolya, what she really wants. And she says, in Russia at the time, I want a passport, a visa, and a berth on the Harlem when it leaves. That's what I want. And and you can do this for me, Kalia. He came to me then, he pulled me to him, that intoxicating smell, the slight give of his flesh, his breath against my neck. Give me some time, give me a few weeks. We have waited our whole lives for this. And then I knew he wasn't going to help me. A few weeks meant never, and the Harlem would be gone. Winter would come, then there would be spring, the air turned to chlorine gas, and suddenly my eyes smarted. He loved me, he wanted me, and he wasn't going to let me get away. He could, but he wouldn't. This sweet, failed life. Soon the birds would be flying south, the winds turning cold, and I was trapped by my love. Life caught you. You lived one day after the next, and you fought the rupture. Does that sound like the end of the story? Are you done with Marina just for a while?
Never say never, but I set out to write her story, write the story of the revolution, of her revolution and the revolution. And the book ends when the revolution ends. And her story, you know, every character lives on after the book is over, but that chapter is closed.
I think it is rare and remarkable to be able to dissect, as I said, the words that are on the page, but the thoughts and the depth of a person behind what's written. I have said this before, I'll continue to say it. I have such deep respect for the 12 years of life that she gave to this book, the short amount of time that we will spend reading it and thinking about it, but to take a pause in our life like tonight, for all of you to join us, for us to be with Janet in the place of this book and in this moment, I think is so important and such a beauty that we have in our life. So thank you so much for this evening.